Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're going to continue our reading of Flow by Mihaly C. Mr. C. I call him Mr. C. So I have no idea how to pronounce his name. So this book was inspired by an animated film with the same name that I saw early this year with my friend, Marina. Shout out to Marina. And it's a very heartwarming animated film. If you guys have a chance, go check it out. I'll leave the official website in the description box below. You guys can check it out. It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Film for 2025. So congratulations. Now, I don't think that the book has any association or the film has any association with the book. It just happens to have the same name. But I thought it would be interesting to read the book. So that's how we came to read the book. Okay, so let us start. And if you see, I have certain areas that I have highlighted in yellow. That means there is a footnote in the back of the book, which we will read as well. Okay. And in the meantime, check out our other book clubs. Wednesdays, we have Health Book Club, where we read about all things health related, um, eating healthy, staying healthy, detoxing, things like that. And then Thursdays, we have our financial book club, which is it talks about we read books on the history of finances um, and things like that. Uh, right now, the book we're reading is very thick. It's going to take us to the end of the year. But anyways, we're starting a new book club book reading for the spiritual edition, which is on Mondays, and the health book club, which is on Wednesdays. And we're starting a new book in August because we're going to finish up uh, the books that we're reading now. So join us. Check out our website. I'll leave the registration links below. Check them out. And yeah, check out our merch as well. And if you're local, check out our healing center. All right. That's about the extent of advertisement I'm going to do. All right, so let's begin. The power of dissipative structures. Oh, you know what? Let me move the camera in just a little bit so you guys can see. If you have a book, you can follow us with your book. If not, you can follow us here with the camera. Okay. The one fact that does seem clear, however, is that the ability to make order out of chaos is not unique to psychological processes. In fact, according to some views of evolution, complex life forms depend for their existence on a capacity to extract energy out of entropy, to recycle waste into structured order. The Nobel Prize winning chemist Ilya Prigogine calls physical systems that harness energy which otherwise would be dispersed and lost in random motion, quote, dissipative structures, end quote. For example, the entire vegetable kingdom on our planet is a huge dissipative structure because it feeds on light, which normally would be a useless byproduct of the sun's combustion. Plants have found a way to transform this wasted energy into the building blocks out of which leaves, flowers, fruit, bark, and timber are fashioned. And because without plants, there would be no animals. All life on Earth is ultimately made possible by dissipative structures that capture chaos and shape it into a more complex order. And if, just a side note, if you want to learn how the universe works, uh, just watch how nature works, how Mother Nature works. Mother Nature is very abundant. If any of you has done gardening or farming would know, I have an organic garden in the back. Um, I can't say I'm a farmer, but just my observation. Um, Mother Nature is super, super abundant and it's not wasteful. Everything recycles. So it's very interesting as you observe Mother Nature and how nature works. And interesting. Anyways, Human beings have also managed to utilize waste energy to serve their goals. The first major technological invention, that of fire, is a good example. In the beginning, fire started at random. Volcanoes, lightning, and spontaneous combustion ignited fuel here and there, and the energy of the decomposing timber was dispersed without purpose. As they learned to take control over fire, people used the dissipating energy to warm their caves, cook their food, and finally to smelt and forge objects made of metal. Engines run by steam, electricity, gasoline, and nuclear fission are also based on the same principle to take advantage of energy that otherwise would be lost or opposed to our goals. Unless men learn various tricks for transforming the forces of disorder into something they could use, we would not have survived as successfully as we have. Okay, so let's read the footnote on dissipative structure. Okay, dissipative structures. For the meaning of this term in the natural sciences, see Prigogini, sounds Italian, Prigogini, 1980. Sorry, I butchered that name. Hmm, okay. The psyche, as we have seen, operates according to similar principles. The integrity of the self depends on the ability to take neutral or destructive events and turn them into positive ones. Getting fired could be a godsend, but if one took the opportunity to find something else to do that was more in tune with one's desires. Oh, okay. Let me read that again. I don't think I read it right. Getting fired could be a godsend if one took the opportunity to find something else to do that was more in tune with one's desires. In each person's life, the chances of only good things happening are extremely slim. Really? I think it depends on your perspective. Just a side note. If you focus on the good things are always happening. Interesting sentence. The likelihood that our desires will be always fulfilled is so minute as to be negligible. Ah, I don't think he understands the power of the conscious mind. That's the way I read it. I don't know. What do you think? It's an interesting statement that he made. Sooner or later, everyone will have to confront events that contradict his goals. Disappointments, severe illness, financial reversal, and eventually the inevitability of one's death. Each event of this kind is negative feedback that produces disorder in the mind. Each threatens the self and impairs its functioning. If the trauma is severe enough, a person may lose the capacity to concentrate on necessary goals. If that happens, the self is no longer in control. If the impairment is very severe, consciousness becomes random and the person, quote, loses his mind. The various symptoms of mental disease take over. In less severe cases, the threatened self survives and stops growing, cowering under attack. It retreats behind massive defenses and vegetates in a state of continuous suspicion. It is for this reason that courage, resilience, perseverance, mature defense, and transformational coping, the dissipative structures of the mind, are so essential. Without them, we would be constantly suffering through the random bombardment of stray psychological meteorites. On the other hand, if we do develop such positive strategies, most negative events can be at least neutralized or possibly even used as challenges that will help make the self stronger and more complex. Transformational skills usually develop by late adolescence. Young children and early teens still depend to a large extent on a supportive social network to buffer them against things that go wrong. When a blow falls on a young teenager, even something as trivial as a bad grade, a pimple erupting on the chin, or a friend ignoring him at school, it seems to him as if the world is about to end and there is no longer any purpose in life. Positive feedback from other people usually picks his mood up in a matter of minutes. A smile, a phone call, a good song captures his attention, distracting him from worries and restoring order in the mind. We have learned from the experience sampling method studies that a healthy adolescent stays depressed on the average of only half an hour. An adult takes on the average twice as long to recover from bad moods. Only if you choose to do that, just a side note, if you choose to wallow in your depression, and it's your choice how long you want to wallow it. You wallow it in it as long as you want. 5 seconds, 10 minutes, one day, a week, few months, it's up to you. That's my opinion. Okay, let's read the footnote on transformational skills in adolescence. One longitudinal study conducted with the ESM, Freeman, Larson, and Mr. C, 1986, suggests that older teenagers have just as many negative experiences with family, with friends, and alone as younger teenagers do, but that they interpret them more leniently. That is, the conflicts that at 13 years of age seem tragic at 17 are seen to be perfectly manageable. Mm. In a few years, however, by the time they are 17, sorry, let me adjust that here for a minute. Okay. In a few years, however, by the time they are 17 or 18, teenagers are generally able to place negative events in perspective, and they are no longer destroyed by things that don't work out as desired. It is at this stage that for most people, the ability to control consciousness begins. Partly, this ability is the product of the mere passage of time. Having been disappointed before and having survived the disappointment, the older teen knows that a situation is excuse me. Oh, burped my coffee there. Sorry about that. The older teen knows that a situation is not as bad as it may seem at the moment. Partly, it is knowing that other people also have been going through the same problems and have been able to resolve them. The knowledge that one's sufferings are shared adds an important perspective to the egocentrism of youth. The peak in the development of coping skills is reached when a young man or woman has achieved a strong enough sense of self based on personally selected goals that no external disappointment can entirely undermine who he or she is. For some people, the strength derives from a goal that involves identification with the family, with the country, or with a religion or an ideology. For others, it depends on mastery of a harmonious system of symbols, such as art, music, or physics. Srinivasa Ramanujan, the young mathematical genius from India, had so much of his psychic energy invested in number theory that poverty, sickness, pain, and even rapidly approaching death, although tiresome, had no chance of distracting his mind from calculations. In fact, they just spurred him on to greater creativity. On his deathbed, he kept on marveling at the beauty of the equations he was discovering, and the serenity of his mind reflected the order of the symbols he used. And this is my theory, just a side note. There is a movie that was made about him, I think. I don't remember the name, but I think it's about him, if I'm correct. Anyways, I'll leave the movie link in full movie link in the description box below so you guys can watch it. But I think for him, he tapped into the non-physical, the metaphysical, the spiritual realm. Um, and that was his strength. Same thing with Nikola Tesla. Yeah, when people tap into the spiritual, it's and you're tuned into the spiritual. What did Abraham say? Tune in, tapped in, turned on. I like that phrase a lot. Tune in, tapped in, turned on to spirit. It's very powerful. It's a source of uh, groundedness and strength. that you can't experience with just your egoistic consciousness. That's my 2 cents. Okay. Why are some people weakened by stress while others gain strength from it? Basically, the answer is simple. Those who know how to transform a hopeless situation into a new flow activity that can be controlled will be able to enjoy themselves and emerge stronger from the ordeal. There are three main steps that seem to be involved in such transformations. One, unself-conscious self-assurance. As Richard Logan found in his study of individuals who survived severe physical ordeals, polar explorers wandering alone in the Arctic, concentration camp inmates, one common attitude shared by such people was the implicit belief that their destiny was in their hands. They did not doubt their own resources would be sufficient to allow them to determine their fate. In that sense, one would call them self-assured, yet at the same time, their egos seem curiously absent. They are not self-centered. Their energy is typically not bent on dominating their environment as much as on finding a way to function within it harmoniously. This attitude occurs when a person no longer sees himself in opposition to the environment. As an individual who insists that his goals, his intentions take precedence over everything else. Instead, he feels a part of whatever goes on around him and tries to do his best within the system in which he must operate. Paradoxically, this sense of humility, the recognition that one's goals may have to be subordinated to a greater entity, and that to succeed, one may have to play by a different set of rules from what one would prefer, is a hallmark of strong people. Yeah, being flexible, right? That's adaptable, flexible and adaptable. People who are flexible and adaptable, whether in your personal life or in business or whatever, or family, uh, tends to survive. Let's see here. What am I reading? Okay, unself-conscious self-assurance. For the development of this for the development of this concept, see Logan, 1985, 1988. To take a trivial but common example, suppose that one cold morning when you are in a hurry to get to the office, the car engine won't start when you try the ignition. In such circumstances, many people become increasingly obsessed with their goal, getting to the office, that they cannot formulate any other plans. They may curse the car, turn the ignition key more frantically, slam the dashboard in exacerbation, usually to no avail. Their ego involvement prevents them from coping effectively with frustration and from realizing their goal. A more sensible approach would be to recognize that it makes no difference to the car that you have to be downtown in a hurry. The car follows its own laws, and the only way to get it moving is by taking them into account. If you have no idea what may be wrong with the starter, it makes more sense to call a cab or form an alternative goal. Cancel the appointment and find something useful to do at home instead. Basically, to arrive at this level of self-assurance, one must trust oneself, one's environment, and one's place in it. A good pilot knows her skills. As confidence in the machine she is sorry, a good pilot knows her skills, has confidence in the machine she is flying, and is aware of what actions are required in case of a hurricane or in case the wings ice over. Therefore, she is confident in her ability to cope with whatever weather conditions may arise, not because she will force the plane to obey her will, but because she will be the instrument for matching the properties of the plane to the conditions of the air. As much as such, she is an indispensable link for the safety of the plane, but it is only as a link. as a catalyst, as a component of the airplane person system, obeying the rules of that system that she can achieve her goal. And just a side note, there's a lot of talk about AI and AI being conscious. I don't think AI has the ability to do what humans do because humans take in the situation, analyze it, and adjust and adapt as needed. I don't think AI can do that. The best it can do is just to take in information, synthesize it, and analyze it, and that's it. It can't, it doesn't get into the meta consciousness or meta thinking, which humans can do. Just a thought. Mm. Okay, number two, focusing attention on the world. It is difficult to notice the environment as long as attention is mainly focused inward, as long as most of one's psychic energy is absorbed by the concerns and desires of the ego. People who know how to transform stress into enjoyable challenge spend very little time thinking about themselves. They're not expending all their energy trying to satisfy what they believe to be their needs or worrying about socially conditioned desires. Instead, their attention is alert, constantly processing information from their surroundings. The focus is still set by the person's goal, but it is open enough to notice and adapt to external events, even if they are not directly relevant to what he wants to accomplish. An open stance makes it possible for a person to be objective, to be aware of alternative possibilities, to feel a part of the surrounding world. This total involvement with the environment is well expressed by the rock climber Yvonne. What? I think that's French. Chouinard. Sorry, I butchered that. Chouinard, Chaunard. Okay, whatever. Yvonne, rock climber, Yvonne, describing one of his ascents on the fearsome El Capitan in Yosemite. Quote, each individual crystal in the granite stood out in bold relief. The varied shapes of the clouds never ceased to attract our attention. For the first time, we noticed tiny bugs that were all over the walls, so tiny that they were barely noticeable. I stared at one for 15 minutes, watching him move and admiring his brilliant red color. How could one ever be bored with so many good things to see and feel? The unity with our joyous surroundings, this ultra penetrating perception, gave us a feeling that we had not had for years. End quote. And there's an ongoing debate about science and God. If you study science, just a side note, if you study science, how can you not see God in it, in my opinion? Because it's just so beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Um, oh, there's another quote from Lindbergh. Let's read that first, and then I'll read the uh footnote. Okay. Achieving this unity with one's surroundings is not only an important component of enjoyable flow experiences, but is also a central mechanism by which adversity is conquered. In the first place, when attention is focused away from the self, frustrations of one's desires have less of a chance to disrupt consciousness. To experience psychic entropy, one must concentrate on the internal disorder, but by paying attention to what is happening around oneself instead, the destructive effects of stress are lessened. Second, the person whose attention is immersed in the environment becomes part of it. She participates in the system by linking herself to it through psychic energy. This, in turn, makes it possible for her to understand the properties of the system so that she can find a better way to adapt to a problematic situation. Returning again to the example of the car that wouldn't start, if your attention is completely absorbed by the goal of making it to the office in time, your mind might be full of images about what will happen if you're late and of hostile thoughts about your uncooperative vehicle. Then you are less likely to notice what the car is trying to tell you, that the engine is flooded or that the battery is dead. Similarly, the pilot who spends too much energy contemplating what she wants the plane to do might miss the information that will enable her to navigate safely. A sense of complete openness to the environment is well described by Charles Lindbergh, who experienced it during his epic making solo crossing of the Atlantic. My cockpit, my cockpit is small and its walls are thin, but inside this cocoon, I feel secure despite the speculations of my mind. I become minutely conscious of details in my cockpit, of the instruments, the levers, the angles of construction. Each item takes on a new value. I study weld marks on the tubing, which are the frozen ripples of steel through which pass invisible hundredweights of strain. A dot of radiolite paint on the altimeter's face, the battery of fuel valves. All such things, which I never considered much before, are now obvious and important. I may be flying a complicated airplane, rushing through space, but in this cabin, I'm surrounded by simplicity and thoughts set free of time. End quote. Okay, so the quote about each individual crystal from the rock climber, this quote was from, I'll call him Mr. C. No, the book is the author's Mr. C. Okay, I'll call him the rock climber. Schaunard. Okay, I'm not even going to try. Was reported in Robinson, 1969, page 6. And the quote from Limburg, my cockpit is small, is from Limburg, 1953, page 227 and 228. A former colleague of mine, G, used to tell a gruesome story from his Air Force years that illustrates how dangerous excessive concern with safety can be when it demands so much attention that it makes us oblivious to the rest of reality. During the Korean War, G's unit was involved in routine parachute training. One day, as the group was preparing for a drop, it was discovered that there were not enough regular parachutes to go around, and one of the right-handed men was forced to take a left-handed chute. It is the same as the others, the ordnance sergeant assured him, but the ripcord hangs on the left side of the harness. You can release the chute with either hand, but it is easier to do with the left. The team boarded the plane, went up to 8,000 feet, and over the target area, one after the other, they jumped out. Everything went well except for one of the men. His parachute never opened, and he fell straight to his death on the desert below. Oh my gosh, what a way to die. Oh, I wouldn't want to die that way. G was part of the investigating team sent to determine why the chute didn't open. The dead soldier was the one who had been given the left-handed release latch. The uniform on the right side of his chest, where the ripcord for a regular parachute would have been, had been completely torn off. Even the flesh of his chest had been gouged out in long gashes by his bloody right hand. A few inches to the left was the actual ripcord, apparently untouched. There had been nothing wrong with the parachute. The problem had been that while falling through that awful eternity, the man had become fixated on the idea that to open the chute, he had to find the release in the accustomed place. His fear was so intense that it blinded him to the fact that safety was literally at his fingertips. In a threatening situation, it is natural to mobilize psychic energy, draw it inward, and use it as a defense against the threat. But this innate reaction, more often than not, compromises the ability to cope. It exacerbates the experience of inner turmoil, reduces the flexibility of response, and, perhaps worse than anything else, it isolates a person from the rest of the world, leaving him alone with his frustrations. On the other hand, if one continues to stay in touch with what is going on, new possibilities are likely to emerge, which in turn might suggest new responses, and one is less likely to be entirely cut off from the stream of life. Three, the discovery of new solutions. There are basically two ways to cope with the situation that creates psychic entropy. One is to focus attention on the obstacles to achieving one's goals and then to move them out of the way, thereby restoring harmony in consciousness. This is the direct approach. The other is to focus on the entire situation, including oneself, to discover whether alternative goals may not be more appropriate and thus different solutions possible. Let us suppose, for instance, that Phil, who is due to be promoted to a vice presidency within his company, sees that the appointment might go instead to a colleague who gets along better with the CEO. At this point, he has two basic options: to find ways to change the CEO's mind about who is the better person for the job, the first approach, or to consider another set of goals like moving to another division of the company, changing careers altogether, or scaling down his career objectives and investing his energies in the family, the community, or his own self development, the second approach. Neither solution is, quote, better in an absolute sense. What matters is whether it makes sense in terms of Phil's overall goals and whether it allows him to maximize enjoyment in his life. Whatever solution he adopts, if Phil takes himself, his needs, and his desires too seriously, he is going to be in trouble as soon as things don't go his way. He will not have enough disposable attention available to seek out realistic options, and instead of finding enjoyable new challenges, he will be surrounded instead by stressful threats. Almost every situation we encounter in life presents possibilities for growth. As we have seen, even terrible disasters like blindness and paraplegia can be turned into conditions for enjoyment and greater complexity. Even the approach of death itself can serve to create harmony in consciousness rather than despair. But these transformations require that a person be prepared to perceive unexpected opportunities. Most of us become so rigidly fixed in the ruts carved out by genetic programming and social conditioning that we ignore the options of choosing any other course of action. Living exclusively by genetic and social instructions is fine as long as everything goes well. But the moment biological or social goals are frustrated, which in the long run is inevitable, a person must formulate new goals and create a new flow activity for himself, or else he will waste his energies in inner turmoil. But how does one go about discovering these alternative strategies? The answer is basically simple. If one operates with unself-conscious assurance and remains open to the environment and involved in it, a solution is likely to emerge. The process of discovering new goals in life is in many respects similar to that by which an artist goes about creating an original work of art. Whereas a conventional artist starts painting a canvas knowing what she wants to paint and holds to her original intention until the work is finished, an original artist with equal technical training commences with a deeply felt but undefined goal in mind, keeps modifying the picture in response to the unexpected colors and shapes emerging on the canvas, and ends up with a finished work that probably will not resemble anything she started out with. If the artist is responsive to her inner feelings, knows what she likes and does not like, and pays attention to what is happening on the canvas, a good painting is bound to emerge. On the other hand, if she holds on to a preconceived notion of what the painting should look like, without responding to the possibilities suggested by the forms developing before her, the painting is likely to be trite. We all start with preconceived notions of what we want from life. These include the basic needs programmed by our genes to ensure survival: the need for food, comfort, sex, dominance over other beings. They also include the desires that our specific culture has inculcated in us to be slim, rich, educated, and well liked. Just a side note, I remember my teacher said about 80% of our desires and our beliefs and our thoughts are not are from other people, society, teachers, parents, peer peer pressure, things like that, advertisements, and they're not our thoughts or beliefs or desires. Interesting, eh? If we embrace these goals and are lucky, we may replicate the ideal physical and social image of our historical time and place. But is this the best use of our psychic energy? And what if we cannot realize these ends? We will never become aware of other possibilities unless, like the painter who watches with care what is happening on the canvas, we pay attention to what is happening around us and evaluate events on the basis of their direct impact on how we feel rather than evaluating them exclusively in terms of preconceived notions. If we do so, we may discover that contrary to what we were led to believe, it is more satisfying to help another person than to beat him down, or that it is more enjoyable to talk with one's 2-year-old than to play golf with the company president. The autotelic self, a summary. In this chapter, we have seen it demonstrated repeatedly that outside forces do not determine whether adversity will be able to be turned into enjoyment. A person who is healthy, rich, strong, and powerful has no greater odds of being in control of his consciousness than one who is sickly, poor, weak, and oppressed. The difference between someone who enjoys life and someone who is overwhelmed by it is a product of a combination of such external factors and the way a person has come to interpret them. That is, whether he sees challenges as threats or as opportunities for action. The autotelic self is one that easily translates potential threats into enjoyable challenges and therefore maintains its inner harmony. A person who is never bored, seldom anxious, involved with what goes on, and in flow most of the time may be said to have an autotelic self. The term literally means, quote, a self that has self-contained goals, end quote. And it reflects the idea that such an individual has relatively few goals that do not originate from within the self. For most people, goals are shaped directly by biological needs and social conventions, and therefore their origin is outside the self. For an autotelic person, the primary goals emerge from experience evaluated in consciousness and therefore from the self proper. The autotelic self transforms potentially entropic experience into flow. Therefore, the rules for developing such a self are simple. They derive directly from the flow model. Briefly, they can be summarized as follows. 1. Setting goals. To be able to experience flow, one must have clear goals to strive for. And just a side note, the goal doesn't have to be clear because the universe responds with your vibration. And as you focus on the end result of that goal, the hows and the details will kind of play itself out eventually. It's a very right-brained activity. Mhm. A person with an autotelic self learns to make choices ranging from lifelong commitments, such as getting married and settling on a vacation, to trivial decisions like what to do on the weekend or how to spend the time waiting in the dentist office without much fuss and the minimum of panic. Selecting a goal is related to the recognition of challenges. If I decide to learn tennis, it follows that I will have to learn to serve, to use my backhand and forehand, to develop my endurance and my reflexes. Or the causal sequence may be reversed. Because I enjoyed hitting the ball over the net, I may develop the goal of learning how to play tennis. In any case, goals and challenges imply each other. As soon as the goals and challenges define a system of action, they in turn suggest the skills necessary to operate within it. If I decide to quit my job and become a resort operator, it follows that I should learn about hotel management, financing, commercial locations, and so on. Of course, the sequence may also start in reverse order. What I perceive my skills to be what I perceive my skills to be could lead to the development of a particular goal that builds on those strengths. I may decide to become a resort operator because I see myself as having the right qualifications for it. Okay. Here's a few footnotes here. We're going to read. Discovering new goals. That a complex self em that a complex self emerges out of various experiences in the world, just as a creative painting emerges out of the interaction between the artist and his materials, has been argued in Mr. C, 1985A, and Mr. C and Beatty, 1979. The footnote on artist discovery. The process of problem finding or discovery in art is described in a variety of papers starting with Mr. C, 1965, and ending with Mr. C and Getzels, 1989. See also Getzels and Mr. C, 1978. 76, sorry. Very briefly, our findings show that art students who in 1964 painted in the manner described here, i.e., who approached the canvas without a clearly worked out image of the finished painting, were 18 years later significantly more successful by the standards of the artistic community than their peers who worked out the finished product in their minds beforehand. Other characteristics, such as technical competence, did not differentiate the two groups. And the footnote on setting realistic goals. It has been reported that adults who commit themselves to very long-term goals with few short-term rewards are less satisfied with their lives than people who have easier short-term goals. B, 1987, page 373. On the other hand, the flow model suggests that having too easy goals would be equally dissatisfying. Neither extreme allows a person to enjoy life fully. Hmm, okay. And to develop skills, one needs to pay attention to the results of one's actions, to monitor the feedback. To become a good resort operator, I have to interpret correctly what the bankers who might lend me money think about my business proposal. I need to know what features of the operation are attractive to customers and what features they dislike. Without constant attention to feedback, I would soon become detached from the system of action, cease to develop skills, and become less effective. One of the basic differences between a person with an autotelic self and one without it is that the former knows that it is she who has chosen whatever goal she is pursuing. What she does is not random, nor is it the result of outside determining forces. This fact results in two seemingly opposite outcomes. On the one hand, having a feeling of ownership of her decisions, the person is more strongly dedicated to her goals. Her actions are reliable and internally controlled. On the other hand, knowing them to be her own, she can more easily modify her goals, whatever the reasons for preserving them no longer make sense. Oh, let me read that again. On the other hand, knowing them to be her own, she can more easily modify her goals whenever the reasons for preserving them no longer make sense. In that respect, an autotelic person's behavior is both more consistent and more flexible. Two, becoming immersed in the activity. After choosing a system of action, a person with an autotelic personality grows deeply involved with whatever he is doing. Whether flying a plane nonstop around the world or washing dishes after dinner, he invests attention in the task at hand. To do so successfully, one must learn to balance the opportunities for action with the skills one possesses. Some people begin with unrealistic expectations, such as trying to save the world or to become millionaires before the age of 20. When their hopes are dashed, most become despondent and their selves wither from the loss of psychic energy expended from fruitless attempts. At the other extreme, many people stagnate because they do not trust their own potential. They choose the safety of trivial goals and arrest the growth of complexity at the lowest level available. To achieve involvement with an action system, one must find a relatively close mesh between the demands of the environment and one's capacity to act. For instance, suppose a man walks into a room full of people and decides to, quote, join the party, that is, to get acquainted with as many people as possible while having a good time. If the person lacks an autotelic self, he might be incapable of starting an interaction by himself and withdraw into a corner hoping that someone will notice him. Or he may try to be boisterous and overly slick, turning people off with inappropriate and superficial friendliness. Neither strategy would be very successful or likely to provide a good time. A person with an autotelic self, upon entering the room, would shift his attention away from himself to the party, quote, the quote action system he wishes to join. He would observe the guests, try to guess which of them might have matching interests and compatible temperament, and start talking to that person about topics he suspects will be mutually agreeable. If the feedback is negative, if the conversation turns out to be boring or above one partner's head, he will try a different topic or a different partner. Only when a person's actions are appropriately matched with the opportunities of the action system does he truly become involved. Involvement is greatly facilitated by the ability to concentrate. People who suffer from attentional disorder, who cannot keep their minds from wandering, always feel left out of the flow of life. They are at the mercy of whatever stray stimulus happens to flash by. To be distracted against one's will is the surest sign that one is not in control. Yet it is amazing how little effort most people make to improve control of their attention. If reading a book seems too difficult, instead of sharpening concentration, we tend to set it aside and instead turn on the television, which not only requires minimal attention, but in fact tends to diffuse what little it commands with choppy editing, commercial interruptions, and generally inane content. 3, paying attention to what is happening. Concentration leads to involvement, which can only be maintained by constant inputs of attention. Athletes are aware that in a race, even a momentary lapse can spell complete defeat. A heavyweight champion may be knocked out if he does not see his opponent's uppercut coming. The basketball player will miss the net if he allows himself to be distracted by the roaring of the crowd. The same pitfalls threaten anyone who participates in a complex system. To stay in it, he must keep investing psychic energy. The parent who does not listen closely to his child undermines the interaction. The lawyer whose attention lapses may forfeit the case. And the surgeon whose mind wanders may lose the patient. Having an autotelic self implies the ability to sustain involvement. Self-consciousness, which is the most common source of distraction, is not a problem for such a person. Instead of worrying about how he is doing, how he looks from the outside, he is wholeheartedly committed to his goals. In some cases, it is the depth of involvement that pushes self-consciousness out of awareness, while sometimes it is the other way around. It is the very lack of self-consciousness that makes deep involvement possible. The elements of the autotelic personality are related to one another by links of mutual causation. It does not matter where one starts, whether one chooses goals first, develops skills, cultivates the ability to concentrate, or gets rid of self-consciousness. One can start anywhere because once the flow experience is in motion, the other elements will be much easier to attain. A person who pays attention to an interaction instead of worrying about the self obtains a paradoxical result. She no longer feels like a separate individual, yet herself becomes stronger. The autotelic individual grows beyond the limits of individuality by investing psychic energy in a system in which she is included. Because of this union of the person and the system, the self merges at a higher level of complexity. This is why 'tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. The self of a person who regards everything from an egocentric perspective may be more secure, but it is certain to be an impoverished one relative to that of a person who is willing to be committed, to be involved, and who is willing to pay attention to what is happening for the sake of the interaction rather than purely out of self-interest. During the ceremony celebrating the unveiling of Chicago's huge outdoor Picasso sculpture in the plaza across from City Hall, I happened to be standing next to a personal injury lawyer with whom I was acquainted. As the inaugural speech droned on, I noticed a look of intense concentration on his face and that his lips were moving. Asked what he was thinking, he answered that he was trying to estimate the amount of money the city was going to have to pay to settle suits involving children who got hurt climbing the sculpture. That's funny. Was this lawyer lucky because he could transform everything he saw into professional problem his skills could master and thus live in constant flow? Or was he depriving himself of an opportunity to grow by paying attention only to what he was already familiar with and ignoring the aesthetic, civic, and social dimensions of the event? Perhaps both interpretations are accurate. In the long run, however, looking at the world exclusively from the little window that one's self affords is always limiting. Even the most highly respected physicist, artist, or politician becomes a hollow bore and ceases to enjoy life if all he can interest himself in is his limited role in the universe. Number four, learning to enjoy immediate experience. The outcome of having an autotelic self, of learning to set goals, to develop skills, to be sensitive to feedback, to know how to concentrate and get involved, is that one can enjoy life even when objective circumstances are brutish and nasty. Being in control of the mind means that literally anything that happens can be a source of joy. Mind over matter, right? Feeling a breeze on a hot day, seeing a cloud reflected on the glass facade of a high rise, working on a business deal, watching a child play with a puppy, drinking a glass of water can all be felt as deeply satisfying experiences that enrich one's life. To achieve this control, however, requires determination and discipline. Optimal experience is not the result of a hedonistic lotus eating approach to life. A relaxed, laissez faire attitude is not a sufficient defense against chaos. As we have seen from the very beginning of this book, to be able to transform random events into flow, one must develop skills that stretch capacities, that make one become more than what one is. Flow drives individuals to creativity and outstanding achievement. The necessity to develop increasingly refined skills to sustain development, sorry, the necessity to develop increasingly refined skills to sustain enjoyment is what lies behind the evolution of culture. It motivates both individuals and cultures to change into more complex entities. The rewards of creating order in experience provide the energy that propels evolution. They pave the way for those dimly imagined descendants of ours, more complex and wise than we are, who will soon take our place. But to change all existence into a flow experience, it is not sufficient to learn merely how to control moment by moment states of consciousness. It is also necessary to have an overall context of goals for the events of everyday life to make sense. If a person moves from one flow activity to another without a connecting order, it will be difficult at the end of one's life to look back on the years past and find meaning in what has happened. To create harmony in whatever one does is the last task that the flow theory presents to those who wish to attain optimal experience. It is a task that involves transforming the entirety of life into a single flow activity with unified goals that provide constant purpose. End of chapter 9. Wow. That was an interesting chapter, eh? Okay. I hope you enjoyed that. Leave us comments in the comment section below. Tell us what you think, what your thoughts are, your experiences. And yeah, we'd like to hear from you. And check out our other book clubs, the new ones and the current ones, and check out our merch and our website and our center, healing center. All right. In the meantime, have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye now.